Hey everybody, Dave here with another Pathfinder rule reminder for you. And this time we are talking about fire spells and the way that fire spells can affect the environment. I've been getting a number of questions related to this. For example, does the area affected by a grease spell become flammable? And if you cast a fireball spell, does it damage the environment? Will it set fire to a room if you cast it inside of an enclosed building? And also flaming sphere. The question is, when I move my flaming sphere and it passes through the squares that other creatures are occupying, are they damaged? And also, if it's rolling over a wooden floor, would that wooden floor catch on fire too? And the answer by Raw to all of those questions is no. In the case of the grease spell, there's nothing in the spell's description that says that that area is flammable. All that spell does is just make things slippery, so that it's hard to stand and walk in those areas, or hard to pick up and hold something covered by a grease spell. As far as the flaming sphere goes, there's nothing in it that really describes the method in which it moves from one area to a next. It says it has to be on a stable surface, and in the description it does say it, quote, rolls, but there's nothing in the description that says that it afflicts any kind of damage onto the environment as it rolls over it, or even applies damage to creatures whose square it passes through. And it really is kind of very much up to the GM to interpret how those flaming spheres move from one place to another, because all the rule says is when you sustain it, you can move it from its current location to another point that's within 30 feet of you, which is the spell's range. So, for example, you could spend 2 actions on one turn to cast the flaming sphere 30 feet to your right, spend your third action to move 25 feet away. Next turn, spend your first 2 actions moving another 50 feet away from it. So now you're what? You're 105 feet away from the fireball that you originally cast. Then spend your third action to sustain it, which causes it to move from its current location 105 feet to your right, and you can put it anywhere within 30 feet of you currently, so that could be 135 feet to your left, or even 140 for counting the square you're occupying in the middle of it. And there's no real explanation of how it gets from point A to point B other than that it, quote, rolls. There's nothing in that says it moves with a speed of 30 feet, or even that it needs to move in a straight line, or that it has to have a fully unobstructed path. I mean, you could have a maze-like structure winding between where it originally was and where you're putting it, and by Raw, it would, I guess, move through all of those squares in the maze within one turn and get to its new location. So all of that is just to say, when it comes to flaming sphere and moving it, they really kind of leave it up to the GM to rule and interpret the way that GM wants to. Honestly, the way I do it is I basically say that the sphere, when you sustain it, it disappears from the square it currently is in, and it reappears in the square that you're sustaining it to. And then I don't have to worry about any of the path that it is going through. But if you do want to trace the path that it is going through, again, there's nothing in Raw that says that anything in that path is going to be damaged. I guess headcanon could be that the sphere itself is hot, but it only damages things when you sustain it or when you first cast it. So that could be a flare-up activity from the sphere when you do those things, and otherwise it's hot, but not to the point of causing lethal damage. And then we have our fireball spell, which is it targets an area. And if you look at the explanation of what it means to target an area, it says, unless otherwise stated, it targets all creatures in that area. So a fireball spell, it targets the creatures in the area of effect. There's nothing by Raw in there that would say that it damages walls or doors or anything else. So again, by Raw, none of those situations are going to cause damage to the environment, but that doesn't mean that a GM cannot rule differently. If a GM does wish to say that these fire-based effects do cause damage, that's absolutely within their right to do. If you want to see the rules for damaging objects and items, those rules are on page 272. If you want to see about damaging structures and objects, like if it was going to burn through a door, then 577 is where you can find those. I would just caution that I think the game is pretty much balanced in such a way that in most cases they wouldn't set fire to the environment, or definitely probably wouldn't set fire or do damage to any attended objects. I remember many years ago, I was playing in a game where another person in the party was hit by a fireball spell and took a lot of damage. And then the GM said, "Well, you're carrying a lantern, right?" And this player said, "Yeah, I got a lantern." Well, how many flasks of oil are you carrying for that lantern? And he said, "Well, I've got 2 flasks of oil." And so the GM ruled that the flasks of oil exploded on contact with the fireball and coated his body in flaming oil and continued to do a whole lot of persistent fire damage on top of that, because he was carrying vials of oil when he was hit by the fireball. That could be a realistic interpretation. I've shared the stories with others who say it's not a realistic interpretation, but if the GM wants to do that, that's within the GM's right. I would just caution that when you do things like that, it often leads to players feel like they're being unnecessarily penalized. So just proceed with caution if you do want to do things like that. But again, grease does not, by Raw, cause the area that it coats to be flammable. Fireball spells by Raw do not cause the environment or anything other than creatures in that target area to be damaged, and flaming spheres by Raw do not cause any kind of environmental fire damage to the spaces they roll over, and even if they pass through the squares occupied by other creatures. But again, the GM is within their right to manage things however they deem appropriate for their game, but always in the vein of making sure you're doing what's going to be fun for the players. And if you are that kind of GM who wants to ramp up the reality, so to speak, of these situations, I would probably disclose that to your players early on, and when you're setting expectations for the game, and just say, hey, this is the way I do things. If you fire a fireball within an enclosed wooden space, it's going to set fire to the walls and the floor and the curtains and everything else. So that's the way it works by the rules. As always, I'm going to leave some links in the description for more information about spells and damaging effects that might be worth viewing. If you have any suggestions for future rule reminders, please let me know in the comments section. I always enjoy getting those and adding topics like the one I've covered today to my list of future items to cover. And as always, I want to thank all of my patrons out there for everything you do to support me, whether it's just by clicking on the like button, leaving a comment with suggestions, or going to my Patreon and supporting me there as well. I always appreciate everything the community does for me. And with that, thank you very much for watching, take care, and happy gaming!